Okay, Alexander, I'll go back to you in London. The West always likes to talk about the right of self-determination. Well, it looks like the folks in Crimea are about to make that decision in a few weeks' time about their fate here. But, of course, this is not seen as being legitimate in the West. Please comment on that.
Well, it was, it was expected. Whatever the Crimean people decide, the West will not accept them. The Kiev lot will not accept it. So that would not be a big deal, to be honest with you, because the way things are developing, you can see that these people who have taken power in Kiev, they were very well prepared. And they were very well trained. They had all the money. They had all the PR advice and so on. And let me give you actually a specific example. When the whole trouble started, violence basically started from December 1st, right? At some point, I used my connection to the Ukrainian government and passed a message to President Yanukovych: go to the Security Council. The moment the shooting started and the police started to die, go to the Security Council, because this is an invasion, basically. He didn't. And look at the way how this new lot acted immediately. They went to the Security Council, emergency session, support from all sides. I think, the problem is, of course, that Yanukovych and his government, they didn't really, respond properly to the crisis. And I think that point was made by both President Putin and Prime Minister Medvedev. And I think that is the point that, these Western sort of supporters, allies, and so on, they are now operating on the same level as the Americans and the others. So I think for other countries, I think Russia, by the way, in this respect, had a very calm approach.
Very restrained. Very restrained. It's very restrained. But it doesn't. That's not reflected in media. Go ahead, Alexander. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Look at that hysterical comments, statements by all the politicians, by Obama, whoever, yes? And look at the way Putin presented his case in a very calm way. By the way, even a sarcastic note was made, out of which those idiots without humor deducted that he was lying. Putin, with a smile, said that these are not Russian soldiers. You know what he meant by that? Of course they were, some of them, Russian soldiers. But he meant saying to the West, if you think that you can say that these thugs in Kiev are freedom fighters, well, you can then think that these are not our soldiers, they're just volunteers. Yeah. But then, guess what happened? Oh, he's lying. Oh, we see through you, said Obama.
Brian, let me go to you in New York, because this story is moving towards Crimea, because Western media will not focus on the fascist regime or neo-fascist regime in Kiev, but it's Crimea here. What about self-determination here? I mean, they push it for Kosovo. Why can't the good folks in Crimea have it as well?
Well, ever since Woodrow Wilson proposed his thesis for self-determination and opposed to Lenin's position on self-determination, you can see self-determination means different things to different people. And, of course, behind the self-determination slogan are real, naked, material, national or perceived national interests. As you mentioned, the United States and the NATO powers broke up the multinational Republic of Yugoslavia, republics that had lived in peace. And they said, well, these were age-old antagonisms, and the people could never, ever live together, and they must be independent because, of course, they had their own agenda, which was to create small states and weak states and absorb Eastern and Central Europe, the former socialist bloc countries, into a NATO sphere of influence, always under the slogan of something noble, in that case, self-determination. So now you see the people in Crimea fearful, not necessarily wanting to be out of the Ukraine originally, but fearful of a fascist putsch that's taken place, or a fascist-led putsch that's taken place in Kiev, may decide to exercise their right of self-determination and decide to federate with Russia. The United States must be understood by all the people of the world that the filter must be when the United States advocates for self-determination, when they have been the enslaver of nations, as have the French and the British and the German through long periods of colonization. When they issue that slogan, it's the worst kind of hypocrisy and just a mask for their real interest, which is to be able to control all of the Ukraine, to move all of the Ukraine into the United States and use all of the Ukraine as a staging ground in the future for NATO on Russia's border, recognizing that Russia could never accept such a fate, especially given the history of how the Germans and other invaders have come through the Ukraine, first in 1918 when they swallowed up all of the Ukraine after the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, and then in June 1941 when Hitler sent most of his divisions against the Soviet Union through the Ukraine. No Russian government, no government that speaks for Russian sovereignty and independence and defense could allow such a thing to happen.
You know, Manuel, in Berlin, the prize really is Crimea. That's why I'm talking about it, because that's what NATO wants. They want the Crimea. Maybe the rest of the country, you know, you acid strip it and all of that with the IMF, okay, fine. But they, oh yeah, I mean, they don't really care. Somebody's going to make some money off of it. But it's the base. They want the Crimea for that. NATO wants it.
Exactly. So, and what you were saying about the self-determination, of course, with the self-determination, a very big word, a very important word, it is the same with anything else in geopolitics. It is just referring to the geopolitical interest. The self-determination of the Crimean people doesn't play any role in Washington. Any. Not at all. So for Washington, it's only important that the Ukrainian state, what they were saying nonstop, that the state, the integrity of this so-called state, of this artificial entity, is staying as it is now, because the Crimea, of course, is part of the state, of course, with an autonomous order, but as part of Ukraine. So, of course, this is all about this, and whatever will happen at the 16th of March, how big the Crimeans in the referendum will vote for their independence, or even for becoming a legal part of the Russian Federation, it will not be recognized by Brussels, neither by Washington, of course not. But if the same situation takes place in any other part where it fits to the interest, the geopolitical interest of the West, you mentioned the example of Kosovo, what is very good, because now in a couple of weeks we celebrate, in attention marks, 15 years NATO attacks against Serbia when it was about Kosovo. Yep. So when it's about Kosovo independence, complete different standards are valid, complete. The point is that we know that it is like that, and anybody and everybody can see that it is like that, but that what we were talking before, that the mainstream media, the powerful mainstream media, is imposing those lies in such a bombardment style on the people that it is repeated and repeated, that when the Crimeans will vote at the 16th of March against being part of Ukraine, anybody in the West will think that this was an orchestrated referendum and there is no rightful choice or no rightful decision made after this referendum. This is the problem.
Okay, Alexander, let's talk about sanctions here.
Peter, I think we should mention one other thing, if I could.
Go ahead, jump in.
Just remember, too, that in early June 1999, June 3rd, after the United States and NATO had dropped 23,000 bombs and missiles on Serbia in support of Kosovo independence, all the NATO forces prepared for a ground invasion. Remember that, in early June 1999 against Serbia, unless Serbia agreed under that pressure to give up Kosovo, a historic part of Serbia. And now these same forces are telling Putin and Russia that if they exercise their legal rights to have military presence, as they do through the leasing agreement with the base, if they have any effort to secure those bases and to secure and protect the Russian-speaking population in Crimea, that's an act of existential aggression. When they were threatening Serbia after bombing Serbia for 3 or 4 months, I mean, the hypocrisy there has to be brought out.
Okay, well, the Western media won't do that. Alexander, let's talk about sanctions here. Huffing and puffing, is it going to have any effect? Because I don't see it will.
I don't think the sanctions will work. First of all, most of the countries will not even dare to impose them. I mean, Britain, for example, exists on Russian Chinese oligarchs' money, basically, because the Britain is bankrupt, Peter. Britain owes £5 trillion, which it can't pay back, and it's growing. America is bankrupt, 17 trillion and upwards. These guys cannot afford to introduce sanctions and lose, I don't know how many hundreds of billions eventually. And all these so-called smart sanctions, this is all fancy talk. You know, this is for the domestic consumption look at how tough we are, you know, like a cowboy film. In reality, first of all, here's one deal for you. The oligarchs, be they from Russia, from China, from India, whatever, they do not keep their money in Britain or America. They keep it offshore. So what can they take from them or freeze? Peanuts, right? Secondly, when they go after politicians, how do they actually select, as they said about Russian politicians in America, the ones who were instrumental in the invasion of Crimea? What is this? How do they do that? How do they calculate who did that? Do they go for generals, or do they go for the Kremlin administration?
We're fastly running out of time. Manuel, I want to go to you in Berlin. I see it as the EU has broken Ukraine. Are they going to pay for it now?
Yes. Well, when we, frankly speaking, when we talk, the EU wants to pay for this and that, and I am a German, we have to say that Germany at the end will bail out and will pay for this and that, and this is maybe an interesting point. But you were mentioning the sanctions. What is interesting, it's somehow ridiculous to speak about sanction against a superstate like Russia, which has this huge reserves of resources and energy and so on. So when the EU countries talk about sanctions against Russia, in reality they talk about sanctions against Germany, because Germany is the most important EU trading partner of Russia. And of course in France and in Spain and of course in London, some politicians see
fascinating discussion. We've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests in New York, London, and in Berlin. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.
I love you.